Welcome to An Unconventional Life, a podcast where we share stories about the crazy 1% out there who earned their doctoral degrees and then went on to use them in crazy, cool, unique, and unconventional ways. Here's your host, astrophysicist turned teacher, author, dissertation coach, and more, Dr. Russell Strickland.
Hi, this is Dr. Russell Strickland here, host of An Unconventional Life podcast, where I feature the stories of the unconventional 1% who not only earned their doctoral degrees, but went on to use them in strange and exciting ways. I have Dr. Jeremy Weiss with me here today, who's done literally thousands of interviews with successful entrepreneurs, investors, and CEOs. And we flipped the script a little bit, and he's going to be interviewing me today. So, Dr. Weiss, thanks for coming today. I appreciate having you here.
Dr. Strickland, thank you. I'm excited about today's episode because it's the book that you find so important. And when you've talked about it before we hit record, I was like, I need to reread this book. So I won't spoil it. I'll let you talk about it. Before we talk about the episode, people can check out Dissertation Done. And if you picture rocket scientist meets management consultant, that's what Dissertation Done is, because Dr. Russell Strickland started it after a huge pain point he dealt with after studying astronomy and astrophysics at University of Chicago. He's mentored thousands of people over 20 years. So, if you are a student in business, nursing, education, psychology, anyone who studies people and data, then you know who you are. You can call him and go to dissertationdone.com and check out what he does. He helps lots of people. They call him because they're frustrated. So, without further ado, Dr. Strickland, tell me, there's a specific story behind why this is so important, not only to your students, but to your children.
Yeah, actually. So what we're talking about today is a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It was written by the late Dr. Stephen Covey, first published back in 1989. So it's been around for a while. And some of you in business might know of Franklin Covey, great leadership consulting or consultancy that's still out there doing great work today in Dr. Covey's name, and some of his children are actually part of that. So I encountered this book years and years ago, back in the 90s probably, but I re-engaged with this book probably about 10 years ago when my children began attending this leadership-based magnet elementary school. And the school has won national awards. The principal was just this real force of nature. And what she decided to do with the school is she used the 7 habits of highly effective people as the framework for their entire pedagogy. So when they talk about anything that they want to teach the students in terms of how to learn and how to behave and how they want them to act, they always couch the language in terms of the 7 habits. Just a quick little story here. When you go into most elementary schools and you ask the students, hey, what's your favorite time of the day? Most students in elementary school are going to say recess and lunch, right? Well, when you go to this particular school where my kids went and you talk to them, you ask them, what's your favorite habit? Well, sometimes they'll pick out a real one, but oftentimes you'll hear them say habit number 7, which is sharpen the saw. And that was their little language for you have to take time to sort of rest and relax and recharge your batteries in order to be able to move forward and be effective, also known as recess and lunch. So it doesn't matter where you go. Kids are the same all over. But I thought that was just really cute that they had those kids so fully immersed in the language of this particular book that even though they were saying the same thing, they had their own kind of codified way of doing it.
Dr. Strickland, so I want you to just walk people through what the habits are. And I know for this conversation, you're going to talk about what you feel are the most important ones for people to focus on first.
Well, look, so there's 7 habits. Number 1 is be proactive. Number 2 is begin with the end in mind. Habit number 3 is put first things first. Habit number 4 is to think win-win. Habit number 5 is to seek first to understand, then to be understood. And habit number 6 is to synergize. Habit number 7, we already mentioned, is sharpen the saw. And I'll tell you just real briefly, in case you encounter it, there is an 8th habit. Dr. Covey published a book in 2004, which was called The 8th Habit from Effectiveness to Greatness. And that's all about finding your passion. We're going to talk about that a little bit towards the end of the episode today, I think. But in case you saw that out there, I wanted to drop that line real quick that The 7 habits are the original 7 habits, but then he did add an eighth habit on later in his life.
So where should people start? I mean, we could start with one, or I know that you feel some are more important than others.
Yes. Well, so there were a lot of things. If you just listened as I rattled those things off really, really quickly, there are a lot of things that you could think of as a dissertation student. Maybe I should be doing that. Maybe I should. What I like to talk to my students about, what I think is most critical, is habit number 2, which is begin with the end in mind. Because if you don't know why you're doing a thing, if you don't know where you want to go, if you don't have that clear in your mind, then you might end up putting a lot of work and effort into something you don't really want. Okay, so when I talk to my students, I work with adults who are working full time. They have children. Sometimes their children are getting ready to go to college. Sometimes they're out of the house. Sometimes they're still young, but they have a career. They have a mortgage. They have all of these adult responsibilities. They might volunteer with their church or other civic groups. It's not like they're just students who are working 50, 60, 70 hours a week at school. They have other things going on in their life that are very important, high priorities. And so for those students, for that particular type of student, the most important thing is to get the degree and graduate. You're going through this process. You're going through the doctoral degree program because you want to further your career, because you want to maybe start over again a little bit. We have a lot of students who are approaching retirement, and they might want to teach when they're retiring. Whatever the motivation is, the idea is that they are not going to be full-time researchers in a university somewhere, which is kind of the traditional way of doing things. They're instead going to be one of our unconventional folks we talk about here on an Unconventional Life podcast. They're going to be using their degree in a different way. And therefore, the research isn't the most important thing. It's getting it done and graduating. So that's beginning with the end in mind. I want to make sure that you first recognize for yourself and decide for yourself. It doesn't have to be this way. But for most of the students that I work with, it is this way, that your degree and getting it finished, that's the primary goal. So if you have that in mind to start with, and you start making all of your decisions based on the idea that, hey, I want to get this degree and graduate as quickly as possible, you're going to go down a different path than students who follow the path that universities most often recommend. So that's number 1. And that's the first level at which we use this idea of beginning with the end in mind. Now, there's a second level that we use this idea as well. See, the first level tells us, hey, I want to graduate as soon as possible. So I should be making decisions based on what's going to get me to graduation soonest. I want to do it honestly, ethically, above board. I'm not cheating because I want to look at myself in the mirror and call myself doctor and be proud of who I see when I finish. So I need to get it done correctly, but I just need to get it done. Okay, it's not about accolades. It's about finishing. And so when we think about that goal of that beginning with that end in mind, does it tell us how to get there? And the answer is no. It doesn't really tell you how to get there at all. All it tells you is that you want to be up on that stage. You want to be wearing the silly hat and the gown and all that kind of stuff. You want people to call you doctor, but how do you get there? Well, that's where we've worked with students over a number of different years and found out that there are sticking points along the way, things that are difficult to overcome, tough obstacles. And it turns out that the last really tough obstacle is going out in the world, getting data from the world, bringing it back and making sense of that data to yourself, understanding what that data is telling you. That's the tough part, collecting and analyzing your data. That's the last tough part. All right, there's tough parts in between or before you get there. But after that, you see, everything else just sort of falls into place. Your committee's already on board with you by the time you get to the point where you're collecting and analyzing data. They've said yes to you earlier on. They believe in you. They're expecting you to graduate by that point. So your committee's not really going to be in your way. And you don't have to go out into the world and hope that you're going to be able to collect your data and then cognitively come back and understand it anymore. You just passed that hurdle. And then before that, there are all sorts of other hurdles. But again, you've already passed all of those. So if we can figure out how to get you to the point where you've collected and analyzed your data, well, that becomes the last real obstacle to you graduating. I like to call it the tipping point in this doctoral journey. There's about a 50-50 chance, statistically speaking, that a doctoral student is going to ultimately finish and graduate, which is horrifying, but it is
That's
what
a
it is.
terrible percentage.
It is. It is. I mean, are you kidding me? You're a doctoral student.
Like flip a
You've
coin.
gone through undergrad, high school, undergrad, master's degree. You got into a doctoral degree program, and still you're facing like a coin flip as to whether you're going to graduate or not. That's kind of what I call it when I'm talking to students, the doctoral coin flip, or the dissertation coin flip. And it's really awful. But the fact of the matter is, when you get to that point where you've collected and analyzed data, you've gone past this tipping point where it's no longer a 50-50 thing at all. It's basically you're guaranteed to graduate. So going back to habit number 2, begin with the end in mind. If you start by focusing on how am I going to collect and analyze my data, and that's the most important thing to you, that becomes instructive. It's like kind of punching a destination into the GPS, and now we can start setting those directions for how to get to where we're going. Because getting up on that stage and wearing the silly hat and gown, that's awesome. It's great. Everybody should do it to celebrate the accomplishment, but it's not instructive. It doesn't tell you how to get there. Once you know, this is how I'm going to collect my data, this is what I'm going to do with that data once I've collected it, now everything you have to do to get there makes more sense. You know what destination you're headed towards. Was I clear about that? Does that make sense?
I feel like that one principle can be used across our entire life, really. I mean, when we're buying a car, if we're doing for our health, like if you look at begin with the end in mind, that's so critical. And that's probably why these are the students. And it's probably why it's so critical for your students to really focus on it's about what's the most important thing, right? And focusing on what's the most important thing and then designing a path to get there.
Now, important thing to note here, the title of this book was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It was not The 7 Habits of Highly Happy People, okay? So yes, you're right that you could use this principle throughout your life, but another way of looking at this, and I tell my dissertation students this all the time, it's about the destination, not the journey, okay? I don't want people living their lives that way. You want to enjoy your life, every day of your life. You want that to be about the journey. And so you have to be a little bit careful about the extent to which you apply this, because if you're not careful, you just become a very, very effective doer of things rather than someone enjoying your life. So we do need to make sure that there's some balance to this, but absolutely, when there are certain things that the goal is to get it done and it's not to spend extra time, spending extra time is actually detracting from your real goal, then head down, nose to the grindstone, get it done, makes sense.
Yeah, Dr. Strickland makes me think I'm just smiling because I'm thinking, I'll be happy when I finish my dissertation. So in less than a year. So
yes, absolutely.
It's a little bit of grit up until that. Anyways, so anything else on the habit number 2? Begin with that in mind, and I know you kind of go back to number 1, but anything else on that one?
I mean, habit number 2. There's a lot of stuff in that. I mean, honestly, when you start thinking about, okay, this is the end point, this is what I'm going for, it also tells you that you have to be careful and you have to guard against one of the big problems that most dissertation students have. Most doctoral students, and Dr. Weiss, I'm sure you have some familiarity with this as well. You got into your doctoral degree program, in a sense, because you're a perfectionist. Because you you don't really have any other way of doing things. You do your best, everything, all the time. And you've got to be careful with your dissertation that you're not trying to make this the best dissertation ever. It doesn't even have to be your best. Most likely, you're capable of doing more than the university requires. It has to be what the university requires. It has to be acceptable. Another one of the examples that I use here is that students or people who watch the Olympics and watch track and field in particular, there's this event in track and field called the high jump. And it's like the pole vault, but without the pole. You just run up and jump over this bar, and then you land on the little pillow thing on the other side. Well, way back when in the 50s or so, people used to do this by running up and kind of jumping over the bar. They would do like a Superman or something like that. And there was this guy that figured out, I'm not as good an athlete as most of the folks on my team. And if I don't figure out another way to do it, then I'm going to get cut from the team. Well, not only did he not get cut from the team, he ended up winning the Olympics in, I think it was Mexico City back in the 60s, because he had this new way of doing it. His name was Dick Fosbury, and the technique he used was called the Fosbury flop. Basically, he ran up to this thing, to the bar, he ran up forward, but he turned around backwards and went over the bar backwards. And literally, he's like scraping his butt over the bar. And as long as the bar doesn't come down, that's fine. You can scrape your butt over the bar, you get credit. And he won a gold medal by scraping his butt over the bar.
Wow.
So that's part of what you have to understand when you're talking about begin with the end in mind. The end result here is not style points on your dissertation, but getting it done and graduating.
Nice. And so I never knew that story. I love that. Habit number 1.
Yeah.
So be proactive.
So habit number 1. This one's is something that a lot of folks feel like, hey, I am proactive. That's habit number 1. Be proactive. Listen, when you are, if you've made it into the dissertation phase of your doctoral program, you probably already know this. If you haven't, guess what? When you get to the dissertation, you no longer are in classes. You no longer have homework. You no longer have any of the structure that you were used to from, well, at least say 6th or 7th grade on up through all of your doctoral degree courses. You don't have that structure anymore. It used to be read something, I'll tell you what to read, then I'm going to tell you what to write. You write it, turn it in, I'll grade it, and I'll give it back to you. That's what you've been doing from 7th grade all the way through your last doctoral class. When you get to the dissertation, it's like, okay, do your dissertation. What? What do I do? You've got
no
to be
structure,
very,
just
very
do it.
proactive.
Right.
Yeah. It's just now it's kind of sink or swim time. So you've got to be very, very proactive in making sure that you not only know what your goals are, but you're setting milestones and moving towards those goals on a regular basis. It's in fact the number one thing that students come to Dissertation Done for is I need that structure. I need that accountability. I need someone to help me walk through this process. Now,
the highest performers in any industry.
That's what students come for.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, Dr. Strickland, the highest performers in any industry always have a coach. And they have multiple coaches for different things. If you look at Michael Jordan, he not only had the head coach, he had the nutritional coach, the strength coach, like the shooting coach. So people, even the highest performers, I just want to say that because some people view it as, well, I can do it myself. And no matter who you are, the highest performers realize everyone needs the accountability and the coaching.
Listen, I look at it, there's 2 ways to think about this. You could be Atlas, kind of holding the whole world on your shoulders, right? And say, look how strong I was to accomplish that. Or you could get help and do it the smart way, right?
Yeah.
And that's what coaching does, is it helps you to understand that there are people who have gone down this path before and they've learned things that you haven't yet learned. And so, there's a saying that the most expensive education is experience. So yes, you are in school earning your doctoral degree, you're getting a formal education in that way. But if you're trying to finish your dissertation through your own experience instead of leveraging other people's experience, it's possible that you can do that. But I'll tell you what, the folks that have a coach, I think they tend to have their dissertation coin flip come up heads a lot more than the other folks.
So anything else on the be proactive piece?
I mean, that's really the big thing. You've got to make sure that you're setting goals, that if you want to graduate so most students, half of students never graduate. Okay, so let's take them out of the mix for right now. Most students that graduate are going to probably take somewhere around 2 to 4 years to finish. There's going to be some students that are like 6, 7, 8 years. 7 years is the point at which universities normally try to cut you off and tell you you've been at this too long. There's a lot of reasons for that, but that's the point at which most students start to have trouble with the university if they're not done. So some students get extensions and can go beyond that. But 2 to 4 years is where is probably the sweet spot. If you want to finish at the short end of that or even faster, like we set a goal for our students to finish in about 12 months, then you've got to really make sure you're mapping things out. What am I going to do this quarter, next quarter, the quarter after that? What am I going to do this month, this week, to know that you're behind until you've already missed whatever goal you had in your head? You have to write it down. That's proactive. You have to map it out. That's proactive. And then you have to hold yourself accountable, because no one else at the school will. So either find a buddy, an accountability partner, a coach, something to help you maintain that level of accountability. But you have to start by being proactive enough to know what you're going to be accountable for. And again, even that's not something the universities tell students on a weekly, monthly, or even annual basis.
You touched on, so obviously number 2, start with number 2, and then, being with the end in mind, then be proactive. And then we mentioned a couple of the other habits, but you have a specific opinion on number 8.
Right. So we talked a little bit about how there are 7 habits in the book. The book is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But then in 2004, Dr. Covey came back and published a book, what was that, 25 years later? The 8th habit, From Effectiveness to Greatness. And what you have to understand here is, let's go back to habit number 2. Habit number 2 is begin with the end in mind. What is your end? What is your goal? What is your why? I want to graduate. I want to earn my doctoral degree so that I can go do these other things. Well, habit number 8 is find your voice and inspire others to find theirs. That's not consistent with what we're trying to do in the dissertation. Some students think that that's what they should be doing in their dissertation. They should be finding a topic that they're passionate about, and they should be writing about that. They should be finding their voice and sharing that with the rest of the world. When students think that, and it's not the student's fault necessarily, universities encourage people. One of the first things the university tells you to do is find a topic you're passionate about. Oh, bad advice. We'll get into that in another episode, I guess. But when you do say that's what you're going to be doing, is finding your voice and getting your message out to the world, I have to ask you a question. And that question is, how many people do you think are going to read your dissertation after you graduate? Okay. I asked this question to a lot of students. I get a few different answers. One of my favorite answers was a person told me, well, 1. I said, really? Is that your mother? And he said, yes. And I said, your mom's not going to read your dissertation. She'll tell you that she read your dissertation, and you'll be nice and not quiz her on it. But no one's going to read your dissertation when you graduate. Okay. It's a school project. It's a huge school project. It's a big deal. It's a lot of work. But at the end of the day, it's a school project. So if you want to share your message out there, if you want to get your voice out there, write a book after you graduate. Get published, like, for real. Because I don't know anybody who says, hey, I'm having a problem with my kids, or I'm having a problem with my job, or I'm having a problem with my business, or whatever. Let me go to a university library and find a dissertation to help me figure out how to fix that problem. No, you go to Amazon, right? Or you go to YouTube or whatever. So this idea of, in the dissertation process, finding your voice, just put that to the side for right now. Your goal is to graduate. It's not about finding your voice. That's about being great. And I encourage greatness for all of our students, but do it after you graduate, okay? Let's be effective about getting you to graduation first, which is what the first 7 habits are all about. And then you move on to greatness once we change your first name to doctor.
I love it. Everyone should check out Dissertation Done. Check out other episodes, because I want to dig into that more, but that's a whole separate topic that we will talk about. Oh, yeah. So dissertationdone.com, Dr. Strickland, anywhere else we should point people towards online, or is that the best place?
Yeah, for right now, dissertationdone.com is good. We're going to actually, I'm going to be talking to folks about a book that I have coming out soon. And I don't know, by the time you've read this, it might already be out. But if it is, you'll be able to find out about it on Dissertation Done, and we'll give you more specifics about that once we launch. Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Weiss. I really appreciate it.
This has been An Unconventional Life. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe now to keep getting inspirational stories of unconventional lives as soon as they're released. Until then, go out and live your best unconventional life.